All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is John Howe-Wemett. I am the financial planner here at Generation Capital Management, and I am so incredibly excited to welcome our very good friend Christine Szpet to our little live series here. Christine, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. As always, we're delighted to have you on. Well, Christine, why don't we start off with a little bit of a conversation about what your team does, your role, and kind of what your specialties are.
Absolutely. So I am an attorney. I have been practicing 9.5 years, and I recently started my own law firm in the end of 2022, beginning of 2023. I branched off. I went out on my own, and I focused my practice on estate planning, long-term care planning, estate administration, and probate. And so today's topic, this is what I love talking about. I think that more people need to have conversations with their families and loved ones about, what is the plan should something happen to them?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that we've had you on before. We were talking previously about estate planning for millennials. And I think that conversation really resonated with a lot of people. And I think part of the reason why that conversation resonated with a lot of people is you and I both approach our practices very similarly in that we focus on education and empowerment, right? So we want people to understand the situation that they're in, understand the options that they have, and then make the best decision that works for them based on that knowledge. I have seen your work with estate planning. I've seen your work with clients, and I genuinely appreciate your insights, your thoughtfulness. So that's why we really enjoy having you on and exploring what you have in mind for our conversations. So with that having been said, our topic today is, we called it Financial Therapy Planning Conversations Between Generations. And that stemmed from a conversation that you and I had, Christine, where I was talking a little bit about the concept of financial therapy. You seemed a little bit interested in that, and how the process of financial therapy is sort of understanding your own relationship with money and how it impacts kind of how your understanding of money can influence your choices, your decisions, and then how those decisions again influence your own understanding of money. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. And there's an emotional component to that, just like there's an emotional component to us having these conversations with our family. So I guess the core of the topic in my mind is learning about our aging parents, how to have conversations with them, specifically financial conversations. And kind of, I guess that what we thought this would be was, how do we transition from, being just children to playing an important role in our parents' financial lives, right?
Well, and I think that that's the single hardest thing, right? Like the dynamic is parent to child. And we, the children who are now adults and have our own lives that we fully manage, right? Successful careers and families and households. We're still being viewed by our parents as their child, right? And
Right.
And this applies regardless of the successfulness of your career or your finances. It doesn't really change the dynamic that's at play. But it does give us the opportunity to really think about, well, how do I approach this conversation with mom or dad who historically has not talked about their finances or any kind of plans? Maybe they're just not planning people. But you might be curious about what happens, and not from this place of, ooh, I want to know like what assets you have and where they're going, but more so like, I just want to logistically know, like, if you need me to help with anything, how I'm going to facilitate that from a really practical standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we're trying to drill down a little bit more, what are some of the things that we would be looking to help our parents with? Would it be, handling their finances if they're no longer capable of doing so? Like, what are some of the particular items we're talking about here?
Sure. So, I mean, this could really look like, during lifetime, really getting a sense of, logistics in terms of how they even just manage their lives, right? So, like, usually what ends up happening, there's some kind of health event that precipitates these initial conversations. Although I think waiting until there's a health event where now it's a crisis situation really makes it very stressful to then have these initial conversations.
Yeah.
So, understanding, for example, for some people, right, structure their finances and they have different accounts for different purposes. Maybe there's a house account that covers anything related to the house that they own, or a car account that covers anything related to the car that they own. Everybody handles their finances so differently. And I've seen this across my practice. Some people are, very diligent, and others, they have a mix of things going on and they don't even really track it themselves. So it all really depends on the type of person that we're talking about. But as you're sort of thinking about, like, where am I going to fit into this? When is this going to come up for me? It's usually when a parent can't handle something on their own, right? Like that health event that puts them in the hospital, and oh shoot, they really needed to pay the taxes because they waited until the last day of the, tax deadline to make the payment. And, now they can't do it. They can't write their check from their checkbook. So, how does it get done? And even just having a basic understanding, of where they bank and, what they're doing with their finances can really help alleviate some of the stress that comes in those crisis situations.
Yeah, I agree. And I've seen that in my practice too, that there are a lot of times what we experience is people coming to the table and having conversations when they've experienced some sort of paradigm shift or some sort of life event that they realize, hey, now I have to really start taking this seriously. There's something interesting about human nature there, in that as long as the status quo is going along fine, we don't feel the need to rock the boat or to fix things. But the truth is that preemptive planning can actually be more beneficial. And I always say the benefit of time gives us more space to make more choices. It gives us more flexibility over the body of time. So, I think that's a great summary of kind of what items we would need to be discussing. Let's talk a little bit about some of the barriers that you've experienced, or that there might be in a situation where someone is trying to help their parents with these and trying to have these initial conversations. What are some barriers that you could identify?
Oh my goodness. They run the gamut in terms of what barriers there could be. I mean, first and foremost, it might just be in their very nature to not discuss anything related to health, money, and finances. It just might be that they're a very private person. And so any kind of inquiry at all seems like you're meddling. Like, this isn't really a conversation for you. And that should be the end of that. And so it really turns what I've seen on the person, and then how they were raised themselves. What did they learn growing up about, health and finances, wealth, really, in terms of how their family handled these discussions, if at all, and then what their experiences were, maybe when their parent passed away. I found that has been really insightful in shaping people's experiences. So, for example, if you are a parent and then your parent passed, and maybe it was a really difficult end of life, making the decision to remove from all forms of treatment was really challenging. Or, for example, the siblings all argued over the type of care that mom or dad would receive, whether they would be at home or not. Or there was one sibling who was in control of everything, and, nobody else was involved. Like, there's all different types of scenarios as they play out. And then that shapes that person's perspective in terms of what are they willing to talk about? What experience do they want for their children? And I will readily admit there are some, parents who come to the conversation and they were like, I have already talked with my son, my daughter. They know everything. They know where to go in my house, where everything, is kept safely and who to contact. They've got the list of usernames and passwords. They're really all set.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then people who avoid the topic entirely and can't even really bring themselves to have the conversation. And maybe there's reasons for that. Maybe they had some really difficult experiences when their, family members passed themselves, or they've never even experienced it. I recently had a client whose mom was 105 and she is alive and well and living in the area independently. And I was like, these are new goals.
Yeah, seriously.
Right. So, so that person's perspective is going to be a little different because she hasn't experienced the loss of a parent yet. Right.
Right.
So a little different.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of when you and I were talking about this as we were preparing for today's conversation, one of the things that we discussed was kind of the difference, the gap in generations, right? So we had the silent generation. You were talking about how the silent generation didn't talk about anything, and that's how they earned their names, right?
Exactly. They're silent.
So, right, exactly. And so it's going to be really challenging for someone to break through and have that type of an effective level of communication with someone like that.
And even thinking about maybe how that impacts their finances and their spending, they're also very frugal, right? Like silent generation was raised in the Depression era, which meant that they didn't have a lot. And so they did a lot with very little. And that may literally shape their perspective in terms of how money is. And they might actually even be disconnected from today's costs and the value associated with it, right? Like where you and I, probably wouldn't even think twice about paying, $6 to $7 for a cup of coffee. I mean, it's a latte, but their generation would shudder. $6 to $7 should be buying you, a full meal, but that's not what our experience is. And so it's different.
Yeah, I think, and that's a really great point. Just the idea of inflation of value, right? And one of the things that I go back to is when you're trying to have a conversation with someone, I always try to understand their perspective as I'm having the conversation with them. I always try to ask questions that help me to better understand their frame of mind. And part of that is understanding where they're coming from their life experience as well. Obviously, we don't always have the benefit of, the first time we meet with a client, we don't know about their life experience. But fortunately, with our parents, a lot of times we know at least the portion when we were growing up, we saw maybe not everything. Maybe our parents didn't talk to us about their finances in a super open way, but we had some semblance of seeing who they were and how they interacted with money as we were growing up with them. So use as much information as you have, in my mind, when you're having these conversations with people. I think that when you're not aware of the fact that you have your own perspective and you're trying to deal with someone else who has their perspective, it can lead to a lot of stubbornness and a lot of inability to kind of compromise or move or just meet people where they are, right? So that's one of the things that I think is that people aren't always aware of their relationship with money and the relationship that the people that they're trying to work with have with money. Right.
Well, and what's interesting to me is then it also affects like the next generation, right? So the silent generation was that way, which means that the, boomers who were generally raised by silent parents may have experienced that. And then that shaped their perspective. And then they went in, either the same path because that's what they were familiar with, or they went totally opposite, right? As like we, might do when you don't agree with how something was when you're being raised, you pull in
Right.
an opposite direction, right?
Mhm.
And so what's interesting to me is that next generation, the boomer generation, really has this split between them. Some are much more like the silent and some are much more communicative and forthcoming. And then they raise their children. And so now we're getting down in generations, right? Gen X and millennials. And when they're raising their children, and again, it's keeping with the times, right? Because Gen X is really, coming up in the 90s, and that was a very different time than the early 2000s.
Right.
And what was happening in the world, right? Of the experiences that we were having were different. They were, technology was improving at astronomical rates and communication was starting to improve at astronomical rates. But, if you have an older sibling, for example, who's a Gen Xer and you're a millennial, you'll even see differences in how you handle things. And then being raised by the same set of parents, right? You might be similar in how you handle finances, but maybe different in how you talk about them.
Right.
And so that's really interesting to me too, right? In terms of like how each generation has really shaped what this conversation looks like for, the next generation.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. So one of the conversations that I have with my students at St. John Fisher when I'm teaching them, one of the first things that I ask them is, what was your home life like when it came to money? Was your family open about money? Did they have a lot of conversations about the details of your financial situation? Or were you maybe aware of what your status was or what your family's income level was, but you didn't know any details and you couldn't necessarily put a pin in, pinpoint exactly what was happening for your family's finances. And I know that a lot of people in our generation, their parents did not share with them financial details. But what I found on aggregate with a lot of my students is that their parents are actually sharing financial details with them.
Mm-hmm.
So that speaks very much to your point of this is while it could be inherited habits, right? That we would expect silent grandparents to raise silent children, to raise more silent children. We are seeing that divergence. And I do think that increasing communication and increasing openness about money in general, especially amongst different generations of the same family, is really genuinely key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine that your students are really probably more Gen Z.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
And so even then now to hear that they're having those conversations, right? Because like, you're absolutely right. Like there can be some semblance of understanding, like you could or could not have these things, but maybe you didn't really understand why. There wasn't that bridge of connection between work and money and status in terms of career, right? Like maybe your parents were a professional, but maybe not a high income earner in their profession, or not. Maybe they weren't, right? And all you saw was that they worked really hard and you didn't really put together the pieces in terms of, how that impacted your family's, socioeconomic status and what that meant for, whether or not there was food on the table or what the struggle was, right? Like, I think actually it's pretty easy to shelter children from money. And it's not an education that happens in school. It's not happening, at a grade school level or even, at a high school level. Although really, I do think we're doing our children a disservice as we're raising them if we're not really educating them about the basics of life, right? Like, I mean, I joke about like balancing a checkbook because nowadays, right, like you can use your wallet and you don't really need to pull out checks necessarily. But at the same time, the skill set that you understand, like money in and money out and how that works, what is to be gleaned from balancing a checkbook, right? Like the basic concepts really should be, taught across the board to all children, as opposed to what happens historically. We learn these, money habits from our parents. And we watch what happens, right? Like, if your parents were always stressed about money, you learned money was something to be feared and stressed over, right? Like, that's a really scary thing. Whereas if your parents took, the approach of, everything's okay, we may have, we may not have, but there's no stress associated with it, you too learn that. And, there's an ebb and a flow with finances, and, don't get too attached to the end result, right? It comes and it goes. And then there are people who really learn, where you put your attention is where things grow, right? And you focus your energy and effort on saving and then investing, and then it results in a return, right? And so, another money habit learned through families and generations, but not necessarily something that's taught to us in any formal structure.
Right. I would agree. And then one more step kind of beyond that is understanding your relationship with money, your own personal relationship with money. And we definitely don't learn anything about that, right? So we're never taught to be reflective about the way that we interact with money. And I think that some of the ways that we interact with money almost are almost harder to break through than any of our, communication challenges or anything like that, because they not only can our perceptions about money change our decisions, but they can also have consequences for the people around us, right? So that's something like money secrecy, that can be combined with things like overspending, or not wanting to have conversations with your partner about the actual finances in the household. All of it can kind of combine to make this perfect storm of challenges. And then not only do you have to be willing to break through those challenges to have conversations with your children or with your parents, depending on which way we're looking at this, but you also have to deal with your own biases in your own relationship with money while you're doing that. And it just gets so complicated, but that's also why it's really important work.
Well, and I'm just going to touch on that really quickly, because I think that really highlights which is the relationships we have with our significant others, our partners, our spouses, and then the relationships in terms of money. And if we really talk about, what ends up being at issue for so many couples, it ends up being having different, perspective and schools of thought about money, right? Absolutely. And people, that we're not just talking about how money is earned, but how money is spent or saved, and their values and whether or not they align. And, there can be a very big disconnect if, someone is, high spender and their partner is a high saver, right? And there is now a conflict between the two. And again, these discussions, right? And I think maybe our generation and younger generations are better at having them with their, significant other or any kind of partner that they're with, before taking, next steps to enter into a financial obligation, which is marriage, right? Yep. And, I think having those understandings of where they're, aligned and where they're disconnected, and then what the overall objective is, really makes a big difference. But we need these personal experiences to also help inform, how we were, like, the self-awareness, how we were raised, how our partner was raised. And then, again, what does that mean in terms of what we're building together? Right.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. I can't tell you how few clients I've had where it was a spouse couple, and they both have the same money habits. They both have the same money ideology. It's incredibly rare for two partners within a relationship to be on the exact same page about spending, saving, even investment risk. We get couples who might be on the same page for spending and saving, but one has a higher risk tolerance than the other. So we have to, yeah. So all of that is kind of baked into how we how we need to kind of help bring people together and interact, because the household has to function, right?
Sure, absolutely. And having those conversations really also help prepare us for the harder conversations, right? Because it's a lot easier to have the conversation with someone that you're in a partnership with, right? You're like combining on how you're going to spend money on dinner or, a date, whatever the case may be, right? A Airbnb and your weekend away. What are your priorities, right? Are they experiences, which is really, different than it was for previous generations? Like, that's so much more common now for us to talk about. Like, I'm less concerned about wealth building, more concerned about the experiences that I have in my lifetime and that my family has. So, for some people, that's a priority, whereas others really want that safety net. They want to have, a level of security that they're financially, protected.
Yeah.
And the risk conversation, that too, right? Like, you can be on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of how risky you are. And, then there's a level too of tolerance, which maybe it's a little easier for example, other generations because of, for example, the 2008 financial collapse. When I sit down and I talk with people who lost everything, and they were so close to retirement, but then that delayed their retirement because the financial collapse really set them back in terms of what that goal was, right? It's a very different perspective than if you were, in a younger generation and you didn't have much invested. Yeah, maybe you lost in the financial collapse, but you had time. You have the benefit of time, interest, investment, and so you can rebound from that loss. But it affects us differently when we have these big collective experiences that impact our finances.
Yeah, absolutely. So pivoting back a little bit to how we can kind of bridge the gap between ourselves and our aging parents about their personal finances. One of the things that I'm concerned with is people having the proper vocabulary to help their parents. In my experience, most of the people who need help don't know what help they need, or they don't necessarily even know how to articulate that they need help or what they need help with. So what might be some strategies that you'd recommend for people who maybe they recognize that they need to talk to their parents, but they don't even know what they need to talk to their parents about? How would you recommend that they kind of help themselves?
So the best thing that I think anyone can do to help prepare themselves is to educate themselves about what is involved in any kind of plan, estate plan or long-term care plan. And the single best way to do this is to do the planning for yourself, right? And so, oftentimes there's a little bit of a disconnect in terms of our age and then thinking, we need to do estate planning. And estate planning is somewhat of a misnomer because there's actually a fair amount of life planning that goes in, like planning that actually impacts your life in terms of healthcare decisions and financial decisions, in addition to planning for what happens after you pass away. But usually you're talking to someone, in their 30s, and they're like, well, I don't have anything, so I don't have a plan. But that's actually like the most critical point at which you need a plan, right? So like if you were in a health event, it's helpful to understand like who would be making these decisions for you. So if you are not married, you're single, your parents are actually the legal next of kin who would make a decision for you in a health event, right? And so if your parents' vantage point and their choices might not align with your own choices, appointing someone else to be a healthcare proxy, and even if that's not a significant other, a partner or a spouse, but more so a friend, right? Like you are maintaining control by giving someone else the authority to make a decision that aligns with your values. And so, that's life planning, right? Like that's going to impact your life. If your parents were to make a healthcare decision that you would oppose, that's really important for you to take control over. And then through that process, right? Like understanding, okay, I'm creating a healthcare proxy. and, oh, there's a living will component, and we're going to talk about end of life. You gather information. When you sit down and you have this conversation with an attorney and you're being asked certain questions, and they're easy maybe for you to have answers to, it helps you to be able to facilitate these conversations with your own parents. And hand in hand with that healthcare proxy is a financial power of attorney. And the same, conversations are to be thought about, right? And let's change the scenario. You are married, and then you want to think about well, if something happened to both me and my spouse, and we have, children, who would manage our household? Who would manage our finances? And they're joint. And so now we really have to think about someone who's good for both of us. Right. And so now you start going through in your own mind, who would be inappropriate? What are the characteristics of someone? Well, they have to be trustworthy. If you're going to give them a financial power of attorney, you have to be able to trust them with your entire life, right? That's a big task. And so by having that personal experience going through and saying, okay, I've identified, these are my key people, it helps shape your perspective for the conversation that really your parents should also be having and may have already done many years ago. But now you can ask questions about it. Who is your healthcare proxy? Do you have a power of attorney? Oh, okay. That's my, sister. That's my brother. Great. That's good to know. And where do you keep those documents? Are they in your office? Are they in the safe? Are they in the safety deposit box at the bank that can only be accessed Monday through Friday during business hours?
By you.
By you?
Yeah.
Who would we call, right? Who is your financial planner? And some families are really great. They make introductions and they're, introducing, their kids to their financial planner, but other people don't, right? They don't even think to do it because they got connected with their financial planner and they meet with them, once a year, and it's really not any, big to do. Half the time they're sitting in that meeting and being like, yep, it's growing. Great. Thanks. So they don't think to bring their kids into the conversation, but that's really helpful, and then that next piece of understanding, okay, so if something were to happen, right, what do you want? And this is where the discussions can get really deep. I read a great book that helped color the perspective about end of life, right? And what we want in terms of decisions to be made. And for some people, quality of life is really more important than age, right? I mentioned, that person who is thriving at 105 has a great quality of life, can live independently. That's ideal, but not everyone gets that. So, you could be, in your 60s and really struggling with, any kind of limitation, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual even. And then really, that's hampering your quality of life. And so, understanding what's important to someone, and this vastly differs, in the conversations that I have with people, some are very clear about what they would want, and others have, even more specifics. I've had couples turn to each other and be like, give me 10 days. If I'm on life support, I want at least 10 days on life support before you take me off. So I know I'm really not coming back, and I'm really not coming back, right?
Right.
And then other people, really struggle to even have that conversation because the thought of being in that position and making such an emotional decision is heart-wrenching. And that's where the conversation actually really needs to happen. And the same, it's when we're having these difficult conversations with our parents, it's taking it one step at a time and meeting them where they're at. So that's the key takeaway. But informing yourself, right, and having, the working knowledge of the questions to ask and the experience, that can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, that's perfectly put. And you don't need to be an expert, right? You don't need to have a comprehensive understanding. But I think that there's when you work to put your own estate plan together, it gives you the vocabulary that you need to ask some important questions. And if you can generally identify when people are giving you answers that either don't make sense because they don't know or because they haven't actually done it, or that they're okay, that they have the documents in place, that they can tell you where they are. And it's important, but without that vocabulary, it's hard to be able to figure out exactly where the line is. And then if you can figure out, if you have a trusted person that you've gone to do your own estate planning and you liked that process, of course, estate planning, to your point, I'm one of those heart-wrenching people where the thought of putting all of this together, of thinking about what's going to happen when me or my spouse passes away, is really heart-wrenching. It's very difficult for me to work through. But from a practical perspective, it needs to be done. And but it's a very difficult process. And I think that if we can help our parents identify that something at least needs to be done and that they're maybe not as prepared as they need to be, then taking the next step to bring them to a trusted professional like you to be able to help them put together an estate plan or actually get to the bottom of what they need or what they already have in place, I think helps to make it a much easier process. And then you're probing a little bit less. If you know what to ask, you ask smarter questions that are less likely to upset people, I think, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think to actually highlight something that you said it's a difficult process. And I think that is what stops people from ever getting started. And what I have found over time consistently is that once people move through the process, they're like, actually, I thought this was going to be really difficult, but this was so much easier, than I ever thought was possible. And the depths of the discussions that we have really help inform them in terms of, what are their next steps and what are the things that they could be doing. And sometimes, it's not always like so heavily money based. Like, so again, like sometimes people stop themselves. They're like, I don't have anything. And actually, those are the people who should be having the conversations so that they can start thinking about, planning and where to start saving. And then they can start investing and maybe what's the best, means to do that in. And then really having a plan in place to help support their overall goals and objectives really, really does help. And when it does come to having those conversations with their parents and then streamlining them and asking pointed, direct questions, as opposed to just like, hey, so is there a plan? And then, I'd say the single biggest red flag is whenever anyone says, yes, we're all set, with nothing else, like no other descriptor, like no explanation of what all set really means. And that should be the moment where you pause and then say, okay, tell me more about that.
Right.
Right. Like, that's great. I'm so relieved to hear that. What does that mean exactly? Right. As opposed to just, historically what we would do as parent and child, nod your head and say, okay, great.
Right.
And then check it off of your list as the thing to worry about.
Right. Yeah. That emotional burden is immediately lifted by we're all set. And you're like, oh, great. I don't need to worry about this then. This is one fewer thing that I need to worry about.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So when, Christine, would you recommend, I mean, obviously at the holiday dinner table isn't when we would probably want to have these conversations. So when would you recommend people, if they feel like this is a conversation that they should have with their parents? And honestly, it's probably a conversation that everyone should have with their parents. When would they do that? What would be a good time?
Great question. So, the holiday dinner table is maybe the single most thought of for two reasons. And what ends up happening, and I found this actually really interesting, and maybe you will too, there seems to be a seasonality to doing any kind of like paperwork and financial and legal planning. Really, there's an uptick when the fall hits, the weather starts to turn cold, people start to experience some like seasonal, flu, and then they really like start navigating maybe more health concerns like achy, joints and bones and doctor's visits. There's a lot of planning that's done, right? Like in the summertime, you feel great, the sun's out, everybody is like, camping, hiking, out on the lake, whatever the case is, right?
Yep.
And so, there tends to be like a downswing in terms of like, oh, I'm going to go meet with my attorney on this beautiful sunny day, right? And talk about death and, paperwork.
Yeah, no one does that.
Yeah. So then what ends up happening, and this is why I think, this turns to the holidays, right? Is like these are timed somewhat with when they're going to see family. And maybe the holidays really are the only time that they actually get FaceTime with their kids and their grandkids. And so like, it seems like a really natural, period of time to have these conversations. But I think these conversations can happen at any time. And what I think would be best is that they're happening in advance, again, like not in conjunction with a health crisis, right? So like sometimes these conversations really don't happen until someone lands in the hospital and suddenly everybody takes a step back and they're like, whoa, we don't really know what to do here. What's, like even basics, like where's their health insurance through, right? Like Medicare, they're on Medicare. There are parts to Medicare. There's a part A and a part B. Do they have more?
Right.
And like even just some like understanding of what's in their wallet and how is the care actually being paid for. Maybe, they bought long-term care insurance policies. That's really valuable information to know. Oh, there's a policy. It was issued by this company. And if, there is the need for, nursing aides and caregivers, this policy can be, started, and there's a 90-day wait time or 120-day wait time. And how does that all work? And so having that understanding when there's nothing going on that's imminent that requires it is a lot easier than when there's a diagnosis and now suddenly, the reality sets in. Oh, we've got to sell the house. We've got to, move. There's a lot of logistics to that. Like we're downsizing, we're packing all the paperwork away, things get lost in the shuffle, and then a lot of the stress that comes with that. So as much in advance as possible, that's the best time. I don't actually care like what month it's in, just start the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I found helpful is even with people that I know, not necessarily even clients, but definitely with clients kind of across the board, is that when people lose someone who's important to them, it exposes them to those emotions already. And I think that lowers the barrier a little bit, because if I'm having a great day and I'm going about my life and everything's fantastic and I'm really happy, I don't super love the thought of bringing myself to the emotional state where I'm thinking about, passing away or being incapacitated and things like that. So if we're kind of already maybe in a little bit more of a raw emotional state where we had a sibling pass away or our own parent passed away, that could be an impetus for that, our parents to then us have that conversation with them, because the door's open, right? They're already thinking about it.
Absolutely. And I would say that the more distant the relationship, sometimes maybe the easier, because it's not so close. When it ends up being, your parent and then to that parent, their spouse, there's a lot that happens there.
Sure.
So, first, they just lost their partner of however many years. And especially for the older generations, like their relationships tend to span decades.
Right.
To the benefit of their age, right? And then also just culturally, how they entered into these relationships. Whereas, it's if it's not a spouse, it's like a more distant relative, like your aunt or uncle, their sibling.
Right.
It becomes a lot easier then for them to really reflect and then think about, oh, okay, so, this is what they had to navigate. These are some of the challenges that we might face.
Mm-hmm.
What I found when it's a parent and then their spouse that has passed, huge shifts, right? Because now, if they were not the person who handled the finances, they're being thrust into this role of needing to manage everything that historically they were able to, take a step back from. And this might all be very, very new and then very overwhelming to them.
Yes.
And then there is then the call to action, which is like, hey kids, I need help. And that can be really challenging depending on the circumstances, right? Because those kids just lost a parent and they, at the same time, might be in a very different life stage, right? Like they may have young kids themselves that they have to get to like preschool or, to after school activities, and their lives are really busy and their careers are just starting to really take off. And that's incredibly demanding. And then to, be called into action and say, oh, we've got to help mom sell the house. And oh my goodness, this was our family home, the one that you raised us in. Like they're having all their own emotions that are being brought to the surface there. And that can be really challenging for those dynamics as well.
Right.
So I think, yes, that's like a point at which things start to break open because there's shifts in terms of relationships and reflection that allows for those conversations. And most certainly, we should use those moments to really just, push the conversations further and deeper, but remaining, aware that every person's experience around a loss is very different, right? So if you've never lost a spouse, then you don't know what that experience is like. If you've never lost a parent, then you don't know what that experience is like. And if you've never lost a sibling, then you don't know what that is like. And so it's not the same for, the person who lost a spouse as it is for the person who lost a parent. Could be similar, but it's just literally not the same. And so approaching that with that awareness that they're navigating something that is different to them than it is for me. And then, not forcing the conversation, which a lot of times it feels like, especially when someone's grieving, we have to, again, like step up into this role and sort of manage everything. But at the grief, there's no timeline on grief, right? Like it's an ebb and a flow, and it's something like someone can be having such a good day, and then there's the tiniest little thing, and then that puts them into a downward spiral. And then, they can be having a really hard time with things and then, letting everything sort of, fall. But the single biggest piece is understanding, that it's an ebb and a flow, and it doesn't negate their autonomy to make decisions, right? Like they should still be, thinking through these things, involved in these conversations, even if they've done the, like, I don't want to deal with any of it, right? Like, they should still be active participants in their plans, in their finances, even if it's really challenging for them to do that. And when we overfunction and do it all for them, we're actually really doing them, a disservice and ourselves a disservice. We're taking on too much for ourselves and it becomes a burden. And then we're also not enabling them to grow in the ways that they need to grow to be able to have the capacity to handle these things. So
that's great. That's genuinely great. And one of the things that I hear a surprising amount, back to like one of the last points that you made about people kind of being unwilling to participate. I get one of the things that I hear the most is, well, I guess not the most, but that I often hear as a reaction to not wanting to participate in this is, well, I'm going to be dead, so it won't matter to me, right? Like I won't know. It's not going to matter. You guys can take care of it. What would you say to someone who might have that reaction?
You would not believe how many times I have heard that in practice. Like, actually, it surprises me. And namely because that is just not my personal, vantage point on these things.
Right.
But also it's often just said very like cold and callously, like, well, I'm not going to be here, so it doesn't matter. And then it's like a very, stony reaction. And the reality is it matters for the people who are still here, right? So like oftentimes when I'm having conversations with, aging and, parents who are basically like thinking about what they want out of life and what they're, looking for, what's important for them. And we're talking about things like for even their home, right? And the tangible stuff in their home. And, maybe they've collected things over the years. Like there's a physical weight to that. When they pass away, someone physically has to move that stuff somewhere, right? Like it might not go to your own home. It might be going straight into a dumpster, but it's still got to get moved there, right? And we don't really talk enough. And like, it's really difficult to think about that. But whenever I see people who are really starting, they've lived in a home 40 years, they've collected 40 years worth of stuff, like, and they're starting to pare down, I encourage that behavior, right? Like it's a really great thing to take responsibility for the things you've collected that you recognize as no one else's responsibility to handle. And the same applies to your finances. The same applies to your estate, right? Like you can leave a mess for someone else to clean up. Is that polite? Is that respectful? Right?
Is that how you want to be remembered?
Is that how you want to be remembered? Is that your legacy? Because your legacy could exactly be that, right? Like you're gone and your legacy is someone sorting through the mail, trying to understand, where your finances were, calling your tax preparer to get a 1099 to figure out like why you received dividends, like, or there could be a very clear path, right? Like, you could have given thought to the heirlooms that you want to get to your grandchildren, or, what is most important getting to your children. And that's really where we talk about asset protection. We talk about funding trusts for the benefit of eliminating the need for probate. We talk about streamlining the process. And what I'm really happy to report is that as I talk more and more with clients about how we eliminate the need for probate, how we make things streamlined, how it can be a simple process, like people are all about that. Like, they want this to be as easy for their spouse, for their children as possible, right? And so to the extent that requires you to have that conversation and, maybe with your parents or your spouse's parents, and then really have an understanding, maybe it's encouraging some of the behavior, right? Like, mom is downsizing and moving and getting rid of your childhood belongings. Like, don't add to that and tell mom like, oh, you're getting rid of our family home, and then like guilt burden, mom who's doing the right thing, not only for herself, but for you as the next generation. Like have some self-awareness about really like bigger picture, the genuine impact that it has, the legacy that she's trying to provide.
That's a great point. I just want to quickly say, since we're running out of time, if anyone has any questions that for either myself or Christine, please feel free to put them in the chat. We can get questions from anywhere that we're streaming this to. So wherever you're watching us, feel free to put in your questions. So Dave asked, what's the proper document to have in place to allow access to a bank account or a stock account to help pay for end-of-life services? This is a great question, actually.
Ooh, okay. So it really depends. So what I recommend with bank accounts is that you put on a payable on death or transfer on death designation. This is akin to a beneficiary designation like you would have on a retirement account or life insurance. Most people don't realize that you can do this. And even if you go into the bank branch, you might have to talk through this with someone. Like the teller might not know what you mean when you say POD or TOD. And some banks call it something else, like in trust for, in which case you have to somewhat explain what you're trying to accomplish, which is to have a designation that allows for the automatic transfer of that bank account or stock account to the person who's to receive. Now, you said to help pay for end-of-life services. Here is a big distinction, right? Because there's no obligation for you to pay for end-of-life services just when you're a beneficiary of a bank account or a stock account. And so actually, I find this causes a lot of family strife because someone gets 100% of a life insurance policy because it's for that purpose, right? They're supposed to pay for the funeral expenses, and then they don't pay for the funeral expenses. And that really leaves a lot of, bitterness amongst family members. So the best single thing that someone can do, pre-plan, do your own, cremation planning, your own funeral planning, pay for it in advance. Don't leave that for someone else to have to do, right? Like who can best make those choices but yourself? And the same applies, to any other person than you. So do the planning, save everyone else the headache and the stress and the emotional, roller coaster that it really is to have to do that kind of planning, especially when it's unexpected.
Yeah.
That's my 2 cents.
That's a great point. And to the point of the transfer on death, one of the nice features of that is it's different from making someone a joint owner on your account. They don't have the ability to transfer assets or use those assets during your lifetime. They inherit the assets upon your death. That's why it's called transfer on death. So
exactly. And the first thing that the bank teller will offer is, we can make it a joint account. And we don't want to do that because that has gifting implications and that ties into long-term care planning. And that's a much larger conversation. So yes, thank you for drawing that distinction because that's really important to understand. Like this can be something that does actually transfer on death.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's a great question. Thank you, Dave. But I guess one of my last questions, Christine, we did talk a little bit about this during our preparation for this, but I'm curious, a lot of us now have families that are, split apart. I know that there are a lot of families that are doing, the 4 Thanksgivings, the four holidays. What would you recommend to someone who is maybe they have 2 parents themselves that they would need to deal with this? And then maybe their spouse or their partner has 2 parents who need to go through this process as well. What would you recommend to that person who might feel overwhelmed by having to try to help 4 different households through this?
Sure. Okay. So, a few thoughts here, right? Like, so if you have siblings, it helps to start having these conversations with your siblings in advance, right? Because there are also different relationships and some siblings may be more effective communicators than others. And then being aware again about the timing of these discussions, right? And I don't think if you're starting the discussion with a parent, I don't think the holidays are the right time to start the discussion with the parents, right? Like, doing it at a different time when, not everyone is together, when it's much more private, when you can have a dialogue back and forth, and slowly over time is really great. And then as you're picking which parent to have the discussion with first, start with who is the easiest to really talk to, right? Because it's like any skill and it takes practice and experience to get better and to develop the skill. And so if you start with a parent who's already open and transparent and, has made it really clear, like, look, everything is going to, you guys, and I've put everything, all together and there's beneficiary designations. And then you can really start to have that in-depth discussion, like, okay. So who's the financial planner that we would contact? And okay. And what about, do you file with a tax preparer? Do you use an accountant? Or do you have an attorney that we would call? What's their contact information, right? Little simple things so that they know, right? And they know that they've shared this information. And then it helps prepare you for the more challenging conversations, because there are some people who you start to have the conversation with and they are either just not transparent when they're having the conversation because this is a little new for them or it's uncomfortable for them. So they don't know how honest to be, or, they're just like thrown off entirely. And then, that's the end of the conversation. And so, again, there's timing to all of this, like the right time to have the conversation. Those more difficult ones may not happen until there is a health event. And that's okay too. It's a dialogue. It's got to go in both directions. So, there's no point in sort of forcing the conversation before someone's really ready to have it. But then understanding that like the health event or the loss of another family member might be poignant moments where you can start to ask questions that are open-ended that may help you in the long run.
Yeah, that's a great point. And yeah, just trying to, I guess, managing expectations and trying to take one small step at a time. I always say, if you can get one piece of information that'll help you, and then that might lead you to another question that'll lead you to another question. You don't have to do it all at once. Even if you have a great relationship with a parent, it can still be a little bit overwhelming to them.
Yes.
And
yeah. This is not like, you pile everything in the kitchen,
right,
and then you tackle all the dishes. Like this is like, you do them in stages.
Yes.
And you keep on top of it because things change, right? So like it's an evolution and a process to have to navigate. And the goal at the end of the day, right, is not to like glean all this information, and have your, like that's great if you can, but like it's just to start these conversations so that, as things happen and there isn't like this like shock and crisis and then, oh my goodness, like what do? We don't even know where to begin.
Right.
You are at least a little more prepared for the unexpected, and then that builds, right? And then you're able to just navigate those situations with a little more ease. And then in the end, everyone ends up feeling like they participated in the process, right? And so that's ultimately the goal, right?
Yeah.
Clear communication, effective communication, and building, stronger familial ties and relationships, and through all these challenges. So,
yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's an exceptional period on the end of this entire conversation. What a great way to end it and to summarize it. So Christine, where can people find you and your team, and more information about how to connect with you?
Sure, absolutely. So my website is probably the single easiest thing to connect to, and that is FLX for Finger Lakes, and then ATTY for attorney.com. And there you'll have our phone numbers and a contact submission form that you can reach out to us on, and learn a little bit more about what we do. My questionnaires are right on there. So if you wanted to even get a sense of like, oh, what is this process going to look like? You can do that. And then you can give us a call, and you're going to talk to one of us and connect with us and learn more about, what does this whole process look like and what are the next steps? And I welcome those conversations. I really enjoy, working with people and doing those initial consultations. Even if there is no planning to do, it's information shared in both directions. And I think that's so incredibly valuable. So I'm here for it.
Yeah. And that's, like I've said before, and I'll always say it anytime that we do one of these, is that you are always so interested in educating people and helping people to just improve their situation. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about working with you. And for anyone who's interested in connecting with us, you can do that by reaching out to us on our website. Our website is www.gencapmgmt.com. We've got it scrolling across the bottom there for you as well. We offer free consultations. We can act as your quarterback for all of your financial, all of the things that you have going on in your financial life. We work very closely with Christine to process the estate planning and make sure that your estate plan is squared away. So please feel free to reach out to us as well for anything that we might be able to help you out with too. And of course, if anyone has any questions, they can reach out to either me or Christine. If I can't answer the question for you, I'm happy to get you in touch with Christine. But there's my email address, right? the magic of the stream. So it's jhowe@gencapmgmt.com. So with that having been said, again, thank you so much, Christine. We really appreciate your time, and thank you for everyone who joined us today.
You are welcome.